From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, Miracles. Emerging artist bumper music for the first couple hours tonight with a little Californian twist. So be ready for that. Here's what's happening. Overall tobacco use among youths dropped slightly by about 1% since last year, largely driven by declines in e-cigarette use among high schoolers, according to data released. The new report finds that about 10% of the students in those grades, of younger grades, or 2.8 million youth, reported using any type of tobacco product during 2022. Israel has rebuffed growing international pressure for a ceasefire and said its forces had encircled Gaza City as the top U.S. diplomats scrambled to contain a crisis that threatened to cause further escalation in neighboring Lebanon now. Gaza was under unprecedented bombardment from Israel on Sunday. All communications and internet services there have been cut. Here's Charles R. Smith to get his perspective on what's going on. Charlie, what do you think of all this?
I think this is pretty much a classic kind of operation that's taking place. They're slicing, more or less gridding off the north and southern portions of the Gaza Strip itself. The Israeli forces are going to be in for a rough time because Hamas is fighting very much like the Viet Cong. They have very large underground tunnels. So the Israelis have to be very innovative, very quick, and they also have to learn to deal with operations that could pop up in their rear because of the way that the Hamas organization has dispersed their forces.
Charles, there's no question that Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th and created this big problem. Yet the world seems to be attacking Israel now for all of this. Is that justified?
Actually, no. And the bottom line behind this, as you pointed out, is Hamas started this entire episode with an attack on unarmed civilians. The follow-on and what's occurring right now could end at a heartbeat if Hamas would simply stand up, come out, put their hands up, and that would be it. Of course, Hamas is not going to do that. They are hiding behind civilians. They are preventing civilians from leaving the war zone simply because they want more casualties. They want to have the PR, the press, and that is part of the information warfare that's being fought along with the warfare on the ground.
And what about Iran? What's going to be done with Iran that seems to be fueling a lot of this?
The Iranians obviously are also encouraging Hezbollah in the north to shell and rocket Israel. The Israelis retaliated, and of course in the PR we have is the Israelis destroyed a grandmother in their car, which may very well be true. The point there is that the Iranians are going to continue to supply advanced weapon systems to these groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, and to the Yemeni rebels, the Houthi. We even saw the Houthi firing ballistic missiles at the Israelis earlier this week, with the Israelis for the first time using their Arrow anti-ballistic missile system to shoot them down. Part and parcel to all of this is the fact that the Biden administration has pretty much ignored what the Iranians have been doing all along and more or less rewarded them for all doing those sorts of things. This entire war was actually started by Hamas and Iran to prevent Saudi Arabia from negotiating a peace deal with the Israelis. It was right on the verge of doing so when Hamas took off and executed the surprise attack. The real problem here is the Israeli intelligence units, as well as our own intelligence, literally had no warning. The Israelis are the Hamas is using Iranian encrypted communication systems that they have smuggled in, so it has made it very difficult for us, as well as the Israelis, to tap and find out what's going on.
Charles, your perspective is as good as anything I've heard. Thank you so much. The attack on U.S. troops at the Al-Assad air base in Iraq highlights the dilemma facing the Biden administration as it attempts to deter Iranian-backed militias while avoiding conflict with Iran or antagonizing the U.S. allied government in Iraq, where many of the attacks were launched. On Sunday, today, Secretary of State Blinken made an unannounced visit to Baghdad, saying that it focused in part on sending a message to those actors who threaten U.S. personnel in the region or elsewhere in the world. The United States has halted most civilian firearm exports for the next 90 days, citing national security reasons. The Commerce Department said the U.S. will largely stop issuing civilian export licenses and will assess the risk of firearms being diverted to entities or activities that promote regional instability, violate human rights, or fuel criminal activities. The ban does not cover around 40 countries, including Israel and Ukraine, that have a separate export agreement for firearms. A new film called After Death just launched in theaters across the U.S. and Canada and has catapulted onto the box office charts, already at the number 4 spot, probably will go even higher. After Death is a thought-provoking exploration of the biggest question that has fascinated humanity for centuries. What happens when we die? Does that film really prove the existence of the afterlife? Here to tell us more is Sandra Champlain, host of Shades of the Afterlife on our Paranormal Podcast Network. Sandra, what do you think of this film?
I loved it and give it 2 thumbs up. The writer and director, his name is Stephen Gray, got the idea to make this film after the death of his brother-in-law. And like many of us with the death, he went looking for answers and found them in the world of near-death experiences. After Death took him 5 years to make, and it was worth it. It's got stories of several New York Times bestselling authors, doctors, scientists, survivors, including a university professor and an airline pilot. They're all very credible people. It's got a notable cast, including Don Piper, who wrote 90 Minutes in Heaven, spine surgeon Mary Neal, Pastor John Burke, oncologist Jeffrey Long, and our friend Dr. Raymond Moody, to name a few. And, George, there's so much verifiable evidence presented of what people witnessed when they left their body. All felt loved. Some saw their loved ones. They returned to life convinced of the hereafter. I was filled with goosebumps during most of it, and I loved the special effects. It's told through the eyes of a skeptical doctor also, who can't help but say at the end of the film that all signs point to the reality of the afterlife. George, I really think that After Death could cause a much-needed tipping point of people's belief globally in the afterlife. And I think when we take away the fear of death, we humans can live a very different kind of life, and that's the world I want to be living in. And for anyone who'd like to hear the full story behind the film After Death, I got to speak with the director and producer on episode 157 of Shades of the Afterlife, and you can now find the film in theaters across the United States and Canada, and it will be streaming online in just a few months. So our global friends, just hang tight, and it'll be with you. But 2 thumbs up, George.
You got it. Thanks, Sandra. And you can listen to Sandra on the Paranormal Podcast Network by just clicking podcast at the top of coasttocoastam.com. Up next, Cate Montana joins us. Her latest work is called Cracking the Matrix, 14 Keys to Individual and Global Freedom. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie, Sunday night. Welcome back. Let me tell you a little bit about Cate Montana, professional journalist specializing in the fields of psychology, consciousness, alternative medicine, and health. Over the years, a delightful and a very excellent speaker. Cate has graced the pulpits of Unity churches across the U.S. and has been interviewed on hundreds of television, radio shows, and podcasts. She has a master's degree in psychology, speaks and teaches about consciousness, ego development, spirituality, and the nature of interdimensional influences. Her latest book is called Cracking the Matrix, 14 Keys to Individual and Global Freedom. Cate, welcome to the program.
Thank you, George. This has been worth waiting up for until 1 o'clock in the morning.
And are you still on Maui, or have you fled for a little bit?
I wish I was on Maui. Then it would be a decent hour. No, I'm in Florida at the moment, and it's 1 a.m., 1:15.
Did you escape the fires out there when you were there?
Actually, I was on the mainland when all of that hit, and it was pretty shocking. It still is. It's very much mop-up. There's kind of a division between, people going, what the heck happened, and those who think they know what happened.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen as far as, the people who were seriously affected, obviously, were the native population who have owned property before there were titles, before there were banks. They've owned the land forever, for generations. And, a lot of them don't even have proof of title. They've just been there for hundreds of years. So how that's going to shake down, and the quote-unquote coincidence that it's some of the most prime property on the planet for development, it's like... Mm-hmm. It's suspect, to say the least.
A lot of people are blaming the power company for this. Is that justified?
Gosh, it depends on who you talk to, George. The right hand knoweth not what the left hand says. According to the power company, the power had been cut. There were police blockades in and out of Lahaina. Nobody was allowed to get out because the police who were doing the blockading were informed that it was dangerous because there were down power lines that were still active. That has been shown to be not true. The water was shut off to Lahaina accidentally. No warning. I've lived on Maui for 5 years now, and I get at least 10 pings on my phone if there's going to be, a little bit of a high tide and maybe some wind, let alone the conditions that went down. So there was just this collection of you can't even call a collection of coincidences, and I use that heavily and ironically.
Well, let's talk about cracking the matrix. You had an awakening back in 2007. What happened to you?
Oh, boy. I had been focused on, quote, unquote, the word enlightenment for very many years, and had been in the spiritual arena for a couple of decades. I had escaped the Episcopal Church when I was in my 20s, and I was looking for something more, and when I heard that there was a word called enlightenment that said basically you knew who you were, you knew what the universe was, and you had a state of consciousness that supplied all the answers instantly, and I was like, oh, I want that. So I spent a lot of time meditating, and in 2007, after about 20 years, and it was mostly self-taught, I just looked within, and I asked the significant question, who am I? Over and over for, 15 years, and spent hours doing this, and it just like the veils just dropped one day. And it was very clear that I'm not really Cate Montana at all, and which was kind of a shocker, that I'm an eternal spirit, that I was, certainly not going to die. But the more shocking revelation in those 3 days that I went through this experience was I realized I'd never been born.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So it gave me such a different perspective on my life. And it was interesting, waiting to come on the show, I heard a commercial or somebody talking about the movie, Is There an Afterlife? The movie about death.
Yeah.
And it's like I've been in this arena for so many decades that it's hard for me to fathom that there are so many people still wrestling with this very basic question. And I think that's, in a way, the root of the whole matter of what we're dealing with on planet Earth. And the foundation of our problems is that we've forgotten who we really are. Yes, we're human beings. Yes, we're in physical bodies, but our nature is spirit. And we are actually eternal, not in the physical body, per se, but we have forgotten, all of our religions point to this. I mean, we go to church Sunday after Sunday, and we nod and we talk, we pray to the Holy Spirit, and we believe in our souls, and we say the words, but do we really believe it? And so, the very fact that we're still questioning along those lines, I feel so blessed, George, to have spent the amount of time in my life that I have, seriously, outside of the mainstream, turned off the phone, lived in the woods for 6 years by myself, just to get my headspace clear so that I wasn't so cluttered up and so confused. And, so the message got, the bell tolled, and it was like, oh, my God, I'm not really Cate. I'm an eternal spirit, and I'm ongoing, and I am a being of pure love. And, not romantic, the character of love that we chase, but this outrageous power that is the life force itself. That's what I am. That's what you are. That's what everybody listening to this show actually is. A radiance that goes on forever, that has initiated and created the stars. It's, to realize that you're love and that outrageous, eternal, powerful force that creates and destroys universes. It's like, that's me? Oh, wait a minute, I'm worried about paying my mortgage.
You have believed that humanity has been tricked into believing we're in a total false reality. What do you mean by that?
There's so many different levels of reality. I think one of the best things that ever happened to humanity is when the Wachowski brothers, now sisters, came together and created The Matrix with Keanu Reeves, that came out in 1999. And, of course, everybody pretty much on the planet knows the storyline that, we're really in a simulation that is, the movie was we're in a computer simulation, but and that it's the world that we think that we're acting in.
It's not real.
Is not real. And quite frankly, that was my experience on a mental, emotional, spiritual level when I had that breakthrough in 2007 and realized that, wow, I am this eternal spirit. I am this being. I'm not really just a human being in a body that hurts when I stub my toe. And so this idea, the initial matrix, there's so many different matrices. It's kind of like Revelations, the wheels within wheels within wheels. There's so many different levels of a make-believe world. Like, I think I'm a physical human being. That's one matrix. I'm confused. I've lost track of my non-physical nature and that intelligence that transcends the physical, that lives forever. I've lost track of that. So there's the matrix of being in a physical body. And then there's the different levels of, well, how do I identify? Do I identify as a man or a woman? Am I Israeli or am I Hamas? Am I American? Am I, a Brit? So we've got different levels of matrices of identity. My educational level, my socioeconomic background that I identify with. So I'm in a matrix as far as my job is concerned, as far as my upbringing about how I think about money, social standing. There's all these different layers that I would call actually programmed matrices that we unconsciously pick up. We're, from day one coming out of the womb. And then, of course, there's our educational system, and, we're given, the training that we have to have the right answer, and that there is one answer, that we got to know what the right one is, and the teacher will tell me. So there's this constant a building of a matrix that says I always have to look outside of myself for answers, that the answer is out there somewhere.
Now, is it conceivable that this matrix is out there, is real, but what can we develop for proof to prove it?
Oh, boy, isn't that the $64,000 question? Here we come into the whole nature of experience. And once we've had an experience, then, I may not be able to describe the experience of an enlightened, expanded state of knowing my spirit nature. I can dance around it. I can give you a lot of words, and I've tried. I've written books about it. But until you have the experience itself, then it's still just a concept. And so we live in a world of ideas, which is, if I had to say, if you said, Cate, what's the one matrix we're really dealing with? I'd have to say it's the matrix of the mind, all these ideas that we have about what life is, who we are, and what we're supposed to be doing, and what we're doing here.
That is amazing. We're going to take a short break coming up here, Cate, and we'll come back and talk more about your book, Cracking the Matrix. Just imagine that we're living in a non-real world that it was created, but how was it created? Who created it? And we talk about God. Let's find out a little bit more about who God might be if we're living in a matrix. There's much more to talk about, and we'll take calls next hour. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with Cate Montana. Her work is called Cracking the Matrix. Her website is her name, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. She's got some other books out there. We'll tell you about them later on in the program. Cate, let's talk for a moment, if we can, about God. Now, this is going to be a tough question for you. In your opinion, if the Matrix is real and we're kind of living in it, how would you describe the role of God in it?
Well, this is going to be controversial.
Sorry to be so easy on you, right?
No, yeah, thank you. Just what is God? Quite frankly, I have finally I've creepy-moused my way to the understanding that God, the whole thing, is yet another matrix. That there is such a construct around the idea of a higher authority. If God is eternal and we are children of God, and this is the rationale that kind of cracked the matrix for me on this one, is like when I looked at, wait a minute, if I'm a child of God, and that means like any parent, I am as my father is or my mother is. Okay, and my father and my mother are eternal beings. Well, if I'm eternal, if I never was born, which was my personal insight, and I'm never going to die, that I'm this ongoing eternal being, well, who created me if I'm eternal?
Who did?
Yeah, so I keep coming back to these layers of identity, these beliefs that have been pressed into us. There's a higher authority. Never mind, Jesus came along and said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. He didn't say the kingdom of heaven is out there somewhere. He didn't say, follow anybody else. I mean, some people say he said, follow me. And what I think he meant by that was be as I am. I am the child. I am my Father's son, and I'm an eternal being. Death will not touch me, etc. We've been trying to learn this lesson for 2,000 years now. So there are these different belief systems that we have pressed to us that we take on as our identity. If you take a look at media, for example, which is owned by 6 major corporations in the world, pumping out the same message: we are violent, we are dysfunctional, we are sick, we are emotionally erratic, not to be trusted, we're sinful.
All of that is true.
All of that
in some respect.
In some respects, but if the parent keeps pounding a child with that as the message, you're this, you're that, well, the child's going to believe it, and the child is never going to get out of that matrix of belief and that self-hatred, shame, that cripples the child from there on out. And look at the world we've got. We have a highly dysfunctional, crippled world filled with crippled people who have been fed a deliberate lie, a message that is being pumped out through the media relentlessly. For example, that is, we have the globalist reset agendas that, you don't want anything. You're going to, by 2030, you will own nothing and you'll be happy and you'll be on Viagra and God knows what other, antidepressant to make sure you're happy, and keep watching those violent video games. There's all this programming that we're essentially blind to. And so when I say matrix, and I'm serious when I say there's all these different matrices of belief that we buy into about ourselves. So when I come along or somebody else and says, you are a being of pure love, you are pure spirit, Jesus wrestled with the same problem 2,000 years ago with
Sure.
the same message. People were standing there, scratching their behinds going, I don't get it, I'm hungry. I need to feed my family. I'm physical. I hurt. I have a goiter. I have some horrible physical. The locusts came and plagued my property. Physical issues. So we get locked into the matrix of our physicality, and it's so hard to see beyond that program, beyond that message. That, you know, if I get out of bed right now and walk across the room and stub my toe, by golly, it's going to hurt. You know, that's the message that my body gives me. And it's so easy to get locked into that one identity. That's a matrix of physicality. And yet we're so much more.
Can I assume then, Cate, that you are tipping toward the matrix theory, that that's what we live in?
Absolutely. You know, it's really interesting. Way back in 2011, after the movie The Matrix came out in 1999, a guy by the name of James Gates, Ph.D., he was a director for the Center of String and Particle Theory at the University of Maryland. Anyway, he discovered complex computer codes, a special class of codes called, get this, block linear self-dual error correcting codes.
Nice.
Yeah. Say that 5 times in a row.
Yeah, really.
Fast. And they were buried in the equations that scientists use to describe our reality. And ever since 2011, when Gates came out with that finding, you know, the are we living in a simulation debate has just raged with scientists and even, you know, corporate titans like Elon Musk coming in saying things like, well, you know, the chance I think that we're in base reality is 1 in billions, which makes me wonder what Elon Musk knows. But so
well, he doesn't know too much. He bought Twitter.
We won't go there. So there's even scientific validation for, you know, the fact that we're living in a computer-driven mental reality. So, and then you look at our programming from religion, from society, and economics. It all locks us in a box. You know, it's like those Russian dolls. How small can we be made to be?
Mm-hmm.
How small can we finally think how tiny and minuscule and rotten can I think I am?
But if we made it, if we're in a matrix, there's got to be a creator for it. Who is it?
Well, there we go. This is what happened. I was merrily going along 3 years ago, George, minding my own business, writing books about psychology and spirituality, okay? And, you know, which focused on the cult of positivity. You know, just think positive.
Sure.
Don't ever have a negative thought. You know, you can't afford that. So I was very hooked into the whole positive thinking arena, which meant that I never looked at anything negative. Like, don't look at that. And then COVID came along, and the world went to pieces overnight, and we descended into madness globally. And that was what shook me to the core 3 years ago. And I got off of my 30-year meditation spirituality guru pony and went, what the heck? What is really behind this craziness? Why is the self-help industry, George, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The number of self-help books that are published.
Oh, huge. It's huge.
Huge. So there's so many. Human beings want to be good. We go to church. We tithe. We care about one another. We read self-help books. We want to be better. We've got all of this desire and all of this stuff that we do, and yet we're descending into madness and ongoing conflict. What is driving that mechanism? Well, that's the question I asked myself. So Miss Positivity here turned around 3 years ago and went, I think there's an agenda, and I think it's an evil agenda, and I think I'm going to research the nature and presence of evil, the history of it, the nature of evil, and its presence on this planet, which is what I did, which was the foundational research for the book Cracking the Matrix. I was so shocked, George. I mean, I was raised in the Christian church. I mean, so, okay, I'm familiar with the devil or Beelzebub or whatever you want to call the great deceiver. But what I discovered is that there is a name and a description for this presence. And it's not just one being. It's not just like one overarching, like God, and then we match the one overarching authority with the one underarching, the devil. It's not just one being. There are names for this presence. The Greeks called it the Archons. the rulers of earth who were malevolent, sadistic beings controlling the thoughts, feelings, and actions of humans.
Are they real?
Okay, I'm going to track with me here on this. This is the research I did. I go, okay, COVID, the world is crazy. We're going nuts. We're getting sicker. We're dying earlier. Our children are enmeshed in violent video games.
Our lives have been turned upside down.
The world has been turned upside down. What the heck is really going on? So I'm researching evil. So ancient Greeks called this presence the Archons. For the Hebrews, it's Abaddon. Okay, in Islam, there's a name for it. It's Ash-Shaitan, or Iblis. Buddhism teaches us that we're not inherently evil, but we create evil because Mara, the demon who tempted Siddhartha, who is the personification of the forces antagonistic to enlightenment, is whispering in our ear. In Christianity, it was called, in the Gnostic texts, they call it the Antimimos, the evil principle that attaches itself to human beings to manifest through us, to possess us.
Well, are you saying we're created by evil?
No, I'm saying that we are beings of pure love. We are as our Father and our Mother in heaven is. We are eternal.
Well, but again, what is heaven if we're in a matrix?
So exactly. So what is this other force? What do we call evil? The problem, one of the problems why we kind of dismiss this whole thing, George, is the fact that Christianity, for example, has trivialized what I've come to understand as an interdimensional influence that is entropic. It is a negative force that is anti-life. And it is an intelligence. It's non-physical, and it can possess people mentally, emotionally, and physically. So as I say, the Gnostics called it one thing, the Greeks called it the Archons, the Algonquin tribes in the United States, Native Americans, they call it wendigo, hunger-driven cannibals beings. The Hawaiians call it Eepa. The Cree tribes in America call it Wetiko, the evil whisperer. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, called it a deceiving force, the Antimimos, the evil principle, an imitator, and he equated it with the Antichrist. It goes on and on. I mean, Hollywood portrays these entities fundamentally as physical vampires, but what they are is non-physical, interdimensional vampires whispering in our ear, influencing us always to be in conflict, to be divided, to be upset, to be emotional, dragging us down. The whole point is to lower our light. I'm going to come back. I am as my father and my mother created me. I am a child of God. I am an eternal, pure spirit of love. But now, why am I doing all this bad stuff that I'm doing on this planet? I am being influenced. Now, being raised in the Christian church, I trivialized this, the horns and the devil and the red tail and the forked tail, and it's like, who could believe that? So I dismissed the whole concept of an evil influence on this planet, George, because, number one, my Christian upbringing said, it's a forked-tailed devil being.
Mm-hmm.
I was going, well, I can't
Lucifer, Satan.
Yeah, Lucifer, etc. Okay, I can't swallow that. So then I got into New Age spirituality, and it was like, only look at the light. Don't look at the dark. Don't look at the dark. Look over here. Look to the light. And it was all about looking to the light. So the end result is nobody looks at the man behind the curtain. Who's pulling the curtains? Plus, it's scary. Who wants to? We've been taught that this influence, this presence, is really, really scary. I mean, the devil, evil, gonna eat me alive and spit out my bones. It's like, who wants to look at that?
Burn you for all eternity.
Yeah, drag you down to hell and pitchfork you for eternity. So, the fear factor. So what I'm trying to get across is there are so many deliberate blocks to our seeing an interdimensional intelligence that has been on this planet for thousands of years, that has the intention of dragging down the children of God, the pure being ones, which we are, spirit beings, which Jesus taught us we are. And it's dragging us down, trying to get us to believe that we are what it is, that we're violent, that we're corrupt, that were filled with sin. The original. I mean, do you want to know where the whole concept of original sin came in? And this is a thought matrix influence that comes through religion, mostly the Eastern religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. It came from a man by the name of Mani, the prophet of Babylon, back in 260 A.D. And he had a voice whisper in his ear telling him that human beings were corrupt by the very fact that they came in and were born in a body. So that's the foundation of original sin. St. Augustine picked that up 100 years later and got it, embedded into Christian theology. So now we believe, so many millions of people believe, that we're fundamentally sinful and corrupt creatures, that we should be filled with shame and crawling on our bellies, in self-blame, just for the fact of our very existence.
But some are.
But what a twisted teaching to impress upon a child. I am a being of pure love. I am an eternal spirit. So the more I can be corrupted mentally, the more I debase myself, because I'm taught that I'm not worthy. And yet I'm a child of God.
Hold on for a second, Kate. We're going to come back in just a moment. We'll talk more and take calls next hour.